Welcome to the Frommer Travel Show. I'm your host, Pauline Frommer. We are in part two of our series with my darling daughter, Beatrix Stewart-Frommer, better known to most of her friends as either Bee or Trixie. In part one, last week, we discussed what it's like to travel to actually live in Accra, Ghana, what there is there for travelers, what the heat is like, what the history is like. After Accra, though, Beatrix became less of a resident and more of a traveler once again. And where did you go after Accra?
After Accra, I flew to Windhoek, Namibia, where I spent the next around 11 days on a G Adventures tour through Namibia. We went and saw the capital where we started, then went up to Waterberg Plateau, then to Etosha National Park to do some safaris, down to Spitzkop, then Swakopmund, then to the Namib Desert, then to Fish River Canyon before driving into South Africa and finishing the tour in Cedarburg and then Cape Town, where I then traveled in South Africa.
Okay, good. So you've given us the roadmap to what we're going to discuss. Let's get some of the nitty gritty out of the way first.
Mhm.
Beatrix paid for this G Adventure trip. So this is
Mhm.
not at all any kind of commercial for G Adventures, and she'll tell us the good and the bad of it. Why did you decide to do a tour there? And what kind of tour was it? Why didn't you do this on your own?
Yeah. So I considered doing it on my own, and I think that if I was ever going to go back to Namibia, I would get a group of intrepid drivers together and maybe do it on my own so that I could pick where I wanted to stay longer and not. But I decided to do it with a tour group because I'm not the most confident of drivers. Um, my mom and I have that in common, and
Yes.
so it was the other side of the road that you'd be driving on,
Oh,
and
yeah.
for
Uh-huh.
very long distances, and I didn't really want to deal with having to rent a car, figure out driving on the other side of the road, and do a lot of driving in a country that I don't know very well alone.
Sure.
So I chose to do a group tour that was part of G Adventure's 18 to 30 something tour series. So to go on this trip, you had to be 18 to 39. And that was everyone in my tour was within that age group. And
Were they other Americans, Canadians? I mean, who were you traveling with?
no, I was the only American on the trip, which really surprised me. But it was a lot of people from Germany, which I guess
Mm.
when you think about Namibia, it was a German colony. And so that does make a lot of sense. A lot of the signs were in German, and architecture kind of felt Germany esque. There were some Brits, a few Scotsmen, few people
Who you had
from
trouble
Norway and
understanding
the
from what
Netherlands.
you told me.
Yes, a lot of different accents. Lot of a lot of figuring out everyone's different accents and what they were saying when they were
So
sick.
Scots, Brits, Germans, and what you said something else and I talked over you. Sorry about that.
Dutch from the Netherlands,
Oh,
one from Norway. Yeah, um, I think that's most of it. Australians, yeah,
yeah.
but I was the
Interesting.
only American. Um
Huh.
Yes. However,
And
I did join the group with G Adventures. They'll run one long tour, and then if you want to do segments in the middle, you will join or leave groups, that are doing the full long tour. So, I joined the long 42-day tour, I think, that was going or 40-day that was going from Nairobi to Cape Town, and I did the Windhoek to Cape Town portion of it, but apparently there had been 2 different Americans that left before I came,
oh,
so apparently there were more, but not during the segment that I was
was
on.
that awkward? Was everybody bonded before you got there? I mean, did or were they excited to have new people on their trip?
Yeah. A little it was a little awkward. They were bonded, and I do think I had to put in a lot of effort to kind of integrate into the group. There also were groups of people who were from home traveling together. So, there were
Mm.
3 girls on my trip who were all taking a gap year together. Honestly, they were adorable. I thought they reminded me of myself 4 years ago. Um, a lot of the younger girls on the trip did. But it was a little bit hard to integrate, and I think that I am somebody that's very extroverted, so I was able to push my way in. But I could also see it being pretty hard for somebody to join and have them all have been traveling together for over 20 days.
Right. Now, of all the places in Africa, why did you choose Namibia?
Well, I was looking at airfare from Ghana to other places, and South Africa has been on my list for a very long time, but I knew that I had, like, 3 weeks and wasn't gonna spend it all in South Africa, and the Windhoek airfare was surprisingly cheap, and I had never heard anything about Namibia before, and I was just Googling these destinations that came up, and I saw the first picture and was like, "Wow, that's a beautiful landscape." And as I clicked through the pictures, I just realized these were landscapes I had never seen before, and it looked really amazing, really cool. Everybody on the internet who had gone said that it was one of their favorite places they'd ever been, and I just realized, honestly, maybe it's really great to go to somewhere I don't know anything about and can learn about. And I was able to then find a tour where you drove into Cape Town, so that was also pretty perfect for me,
Right.
just the proximity.
Huh. Was it as beautiful looking in person as it was in the photos?
Absolutely. Namibia was one country with 10 different worlds in it. You were in landscapes where you felt like you were on a different world. Like, I didn't feel like I was on Earth anymore. One place where we stopped where it was all of these, like, dark granite mountains, but just all you could see for as far as the eye could see was this, like, dark granite, low kind of mountains. It looked like the moon, and
Huh.
that's what it's famous for. That's why we stopped there, is because people say you feel like you're on the moon. And I certainly just when you are looking in every direction, seeing these mountains, it does feel like you are in a different place. It was really incredible just how many different landscapes I could see in the scope of those 10 days. I mean, in part of my wonder, I was thinking about the US and realizing, okay, there also are a lot of different landscapes that you can see in the US too. Like,
Sure.
maybe this isn't the only country where you could see so many different landscapes, but it was interesting that in 10 days I could go around each day, see something more from, you know, green national parks where you see zebras running around to a sand dune. I mean, Namibia has the only place in the world where the ocean and the desert directly meet. And that's pretty cool, I think, to be able to see just vastly different landscapes in such a short amount of time.
But to see vastly different landscapes in such a short amount of time meant that the tour spent the
Yes.
lion's share of time driving from
Right.
place to place, right?
Yes. We spent a lot of time on the Lando.
On the
Mm,
Lando, what's that mean?
yes. The Lando is an overlander vehicle that
Oh,
GE Adventures uses. It's like this purple van that they've created for these long drives. It was a lot of driving, I cannot lie about that either, and that was one of my my critiques, but also something I don't know how they really could have changed. I think when you're planning a tour like this as a company, obviously, you need to think about length of the tour, like who's gonna wanna do a 30-day versus 20-day tour and who has the time for that, length of driving versus length of staying in places. If we had done less driving, we probably couldn't have seen some of the places. I will say I wish that we had stayed longer at some places, but again, then that turns into racking up a lot more days on this trip. So, I don't know how much the faults I found with the tour were really things I could truly, diss G Adventures on, because I think we got to see a lot of different places in that short time.
Right. It also was an affordable tour for
Yeah.
young people, meaning you had to put up and
Mhm.
tear down your tent every day, right?
Yes,
You weren't
it was a
camping out.
camping trip. Yeah, so we were staying in tents that we put up and took down. Most of our accommodations were campgrounds that, just kind of had a little faucet for a shower or something like that, but I was actually really, really stunned with the quality of the campgrounds.
Mm.
I'm I'm a camper through and through. My mom knows that about me and my sister. We go camping a lot and in the 80K region, and usually with there, it's kinda just like a little patch of dirt. Maybe there's a lodge at the front where you can get things or go to the bathroom. But these Namibian campgrounds were great. Like each little campground would have their own bathroom and shower, no matter how like non-luxurious they were. It was we still had it. Um, a lot of them were in the places where there were wildlife. They had watering holes by them, so you could sit in by your tent and watch elephants drinking at a watering hole.
Wow. That sounds like a highlight.
Oh, yes, yes, I it brought that night brought tears to my eyes. I remember I was having a little bit of a bad day. We were in, yeah, that's when we were in Etosha National Park that night. It was our 2nd night there, because Etosha is where you spend one of the few places you spend 2 nights at. And I remember I was having a bit of a sad day. I'd gotten rejected from a medical school I applied to, and one of the
Let me just
members
say at this point, she's gotten into med schools too. We don't
Yes,
know
I
where she's
have.
gonna go
I
because
have.
she's gotten into a couple, so
Yeah, but I was
yes.
feeling upset, and then one of the people who worked at the lodge came up to me and said, "If you go down quietly, there are elephants at the watering hole." And I ran down, and I had a glass of white wine in my hand, and I sat by this watering hole as sunset happened, watching maybe 12 elephants. There were 3 or 4 babies,
Oh.
with them drinking at this watering hole and hanging out. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. It honestly brought tears to my eyes. One of the other tour group members was laughing at me that I was crying at this sight, but it was just one of the most beautiful, special moments of my life,
Hmm.
definitely.
Before we leave the animals,
Mhm.
do you see the big 5 in Namibia? Do you see lions and zebra and giraffes and elephants? And I'm trying to think what the other big 5 is. Maybe it's wildebeest? I can't
It's
remember.
buffalo.
Buffalo.
I don't think that you see buffaloes, and we were supposed to see rhinos. That watering hole was actually supposed to be a rhino watering hole. We didn't end up seeing any rhinos, but you are able to see rhinos. We saw a lion with her prey, a lioness with her prey
Oh,
one day.
yeah. You posted pictures of that. That looked atrocious, I gotta say. I mean, it was this
Yeah.
carcass that the lion was just ripping apart.
Yeah, she was sitting there guarding it. It was really cool. The smell was not wonderful, but it was a
Huh.
really cool thing to see, and we were able to even to drive past her a few times with the carcass, which was very cool. And even in Etosha, you are driving through this lush greenery, and suddenly you come out to this desert oasis of dried gray mud for as long as the eye can see. And it changed like this in the day that we were doing the safari. It would go from like trees to tiny shrubs to this crazy I don't even really know how to describe it. It was kind of like a desert. It was really hot and like the ground was all dried mud. But it was like a grayish white color that I've never
Did
seen.
it look dead? Were there animals there,
No,
or
it's
was it
completely dead. It was, I think, a dried up, body of water
huh?
that
Was that
animals
the effects of climate change, or was it just naturally that way, or you don't
I think
know?
it was naturally that way, but no, animals don't go out on it because then everyone can see them,
Huh, uh-huh,
so
sure,
it wouldn't really be smart for an animal to go out there, but
right.
that was also really, really a really cool day.
So you saw this area that looked like the moon, you saw this wasteland of mud, you saw these incredible sand dunes leading right to the ocean because that was the desert.
Yes.
And wonderful animals. What about the culture of Namibia? Did
Hmm.
you get any kind of insight into what it was like to live there?
Yeah. So that is, I would say, my biggest fault with G Adventure,
Mm.
or at least the part of the tour that I was on. Apparently, there was a little bit more cultural stuff in the first half of the tour. We had one day where we went to a museum in South Africa, actually, so that was already as we'd crossed into the border. One day in Namibia, we had a cappella group that was there come and sing some of their, songs to us, and we met a few women who worked at a place called Pinduka, which was a Peace Corps initiative, I think, for Namibian women to create crafts and create their own revenue for themselves, and so we learned a little bit from them. And our 2 tour guides, Masivu and Anthony, who were wonderful, human beings, they would tell us about their history. They're both Kenyans, and they would talk a lot about, their culture and the culture of Sub-Saharan Africa and a little bit about, like, the San people and the different, tribes of where we were driving through. But in terms of actual, interaction with Namibian residents, there wasn't much of that. And G Adventures stays so cheap because you can add optional activities on
Huh.
most days, and a good amount is included, but anything cultural, like you could take township tours, were added on. So we drove through a lot of these townships, but you had to pay an extra fee one day to do a township tour, and it was most of our free time. There were also multiple options. So the day of the township tour, I could do the township tour, or I could bike through the dunes with people and do a wildlife tour, which is what I ended up doing.
Huh.
So we heard a little bit about the township tour from other people, but that would be my biggest critique.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, so that's Namibia.
Mhm.
Then you went to South Africa,
Yeah.
which you told me had the best food you've ever had. And
Mhm.
this is a kid who has been all around the world and lives in New York. I won't curse, but New York friggin' city. Uh, so
Yeah.
she's had good food. Oh, why was South Africa's or maybe Cape Town, or was it all of South Africa such a culinary heaven?
I think for me, it was because there were flavor profiles that I had never seen combined. Most
Hmm,
of the restaurants there were fusion restaurants, which I feel like if you are going to a fusion restaurant in the US, you're not thinking of it. I don't know. When I hear fusion, well, actually, mm, that's not true. There are some really great fusion restaurants that I've been to in New York, but I don't know. I feel like it's usually not a go-to. Like, oh, I'm gonna get a this and this fusion tonight.
right.
And most of the South African restaurants were South African times some other culture's cuisine. And I think that's partly because there's a diverse range of people who moved there. There's a lot of Germans, Australians, a lot of European people have moved down to South Africa. I mean, we
Sure.
know the history of it, that's good and bad. But in terms of what that does to the food, it was amazing. I went to a Japanese, South African, Peruvian restaurant and had a miso soup that just had a flavor profile I'd never had before. They added something to make it thicker, a little bit more sesame and umami flavored,
Mm,
and that was amazing. I went to Foxcroft, which was, a tasting menu restaurant, it was my nice dinner there, and that was the best meal of my life, I think, because it was spices that I wouldn't have normally had on meats or on vegetables. It was just combinations that I hadn't had before that were really
right.
interesting, and for a fraction of the price of what you would pay. in the United States. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
especially from New York,
Yeah.
every meal here is very expensive. I mean, if you know where to look, you can get great meals,
Sure.
inexpensively, but if you're
Well, not
going
a
to
tasting menu.
a tasting menu, you're paying
Right.
hundreds of dollars versus, in South Africa, I was getting a wine pairing with a meal for $100.
Uh-huh. Right. And the wine's
And the
also
wine was
well,
exquisite too. Went to multiple vineyards in my time there as well. We stayed in Cedarburg, which is a wine region before Cape Town, and it was amazing wine as well, I would say. Going to the vineyards was an amazing experience. They're beautiful. They'll tell you about wine. You can read about the ways to smell it first and chew it.
right.
Yeah, that was a highlight as well.
So, Cape Town,
Mhm.
you had spent months in Accra. How was Cape Town different than Accra?
Cape Town was worlds different than Accra. Cape Town was what I had always imagined Australia looking like.
Huh.
Um, it was very modern, um, very beautiful. There are, street signs everywhere. It reminded me of Europe. Whereas Accra, it's a huge city that's very much developing, but there are still mostly, dirt roads, going throughout the city. There are way less skyscrapers and modern buildings. It was a much more modern version, I
Right.
would
With
say.
this incredible dramatic
Yes,
tabletop
cliffs
mountain.
meeting the ocean. There was a lot of, yeah, elevation around it, whereas, you're not seeing as many huge mountains around Accra at all. It was smaller, also much smaller. Accra is huge. It is sprawling. It takes you over an hour to get from one side to the other.
Huh.
Whereas Cape Town, I thought the major part of the city center, was like 30 minutes max, from one side to the other.
Yes, you did the famous hike, right? How was that?
Whew. I mean, this is completely my fault. We went to hike Lion's Head at around 1 PM on an 105-degree Fahrenheit day.
Ooh.
Ran out of water halfway through. I was questioning whether I was gonna survive it, but we did, and the views at the top were beautiful. I think if it hadn't been so sweltering, it would have been a really fun hike. It was just really, really hot when I did it, but it was still very fun, and the views are beautiful. South Africa has the most beautiful coastline I've ever seen.
Huh.
Driving through, like, Chapman's Drive to see Cape of Good Hope, and
Which is the southernmost part of Africa, right? Or
so southwestern part.
southwestern.
So I then, after Cape Town, went along the garden route, and we stopped in Cape Algul House, which that is the southernmost tip, but people usually kind of they falsely advertise Cape of Good Hope as the tip of it. I think it was not made clear to me that it was the most southwestern
Huh.
tip. Um, but yeah, it's that, and the penguins are cute, but that drive is beautiful, the drive to get to the penguins and to
Beautiful because you're seeing, the landscape hitting the blue ocean and
yeah.
vineyards, and what else do you see? It's called the garden route. Did you see a lot of flowers and a lot of gardens?
No, not really. It's called, the garden route because it was the main route that, lumber farmers would use, timber
Oh,
farming. I'm not exactly sure how to say that correctly, but the wood industry, would travel that path.
huh.
And so it was named the garden route, and that kind of stuck for a while. There are flowers, but I didn't see, too many, like, set up gardens throughout there, but I've never seen water that sparkles that way, like, it was so blue and sparkly, and the cliffs overhanging it, and all of these little towns, um, that look out over it, and there are rocks that rise up in different places.
Out of the ocean?
Yeah, out of the
Yeah.
ocean. There's whale watching, dolphin watching from even the shore. You can look out and see dolphins, in places like Hermanus. It was
Wow.
just beautiful.
Sounds magical. Is there anything we haven't discussed in terms of South Africa that we should have?
Well, I went to Johannesburg for
Oh,
2 days as well, which honestly, people scared me about a little bit. I was told over and over again that as a solo female traveler, I had to be really, really careful. And I'll be honest with you, when you're walking around, sometimes, yeah, you feel like you need to be aware of your surroundings. But again, I'm a New Yorker. There are so many cities that people will say aren't safe, and there are good merits for those warnings, but I think it's one of those places where you need to have a good head on your shoulders.
uh-huh,
Look around, Uber at night,
uh-huh.
um,
But what do you
but
see and do in Johannesburg?
well, mostly history. So I went to the Apartheid Museum, went
Oh,
to Soweto, saw Nelson Mandela's house, um, did mostly a day of learning. I would say that 2 days was more than enough for me, and it was definitely my biggest fill of South African history. So I thought that it was really important to go there and learn about apartheid and the history, of South Africa. Um, but I don't know how much else I found to do there besides
oh,
kind of wandering around Rosebank. But because I was warned so much about safety, um, I did refrain from kind of just wandering around, which is my favorite way to explore somewhere.
yeah,
I didn't find that much to do past the 2 days, but I think that it is worth, it's worth a visit if you're interested in history
interesting,
and learning.
interesting. Well, I love talking with you.
Not
Yeah.
like you do it every day.
Yeah, not like we don't do it every day, but, yeah, I feel like I learned more about this trip than I had just talking with you otherwise, so I
Yeah,
I hope our listeners did too. Thank you so much, Trixie, for
of course.
appearing on the Frommer Travel Show.
Woohoo.
And that is it for this week's show. I thank you so much for listening, and to those who are traveling, may I wish you a hearty
Sour
bon
candy
voyage.
on the table. Lazy afternoons in your sweatpants, watching cable.